in Melbourne, Australia. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
All right. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Today we have Melissa Mills, based in Melbourne, Australia, but sake enthusiast. How did that come about? Melissa, you're going to tell us all about it. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Joy. It's like, thanks for the invitation. I'm, totally thrilled to be here. This is my first live kind of YouTube interview. So, yeah, thank you.
It's exciting. And we have to give a shout out to Tina McCarthy, also in Melbourne, who I've interviewed in the series a few times, and she introduced me to you. And actually, yesterday, I also talked with a guy who is doing a YouTube video series with his brother, and he's based in Australia, in Melbourne. So you guys have like a
Fantastic.
thriving Japan connected community there in Melbourne. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think, during COVID times, we've all reached out to each other. And so we've established these really strong connections. We may not have been able to see each other, but we have connected online, which has been amazing. And like today is a very special day for us here in Melbourne because it's the first day that hospitality and retail has reopened. And for this, after 111 days in lockdown, it feels like our world is changing.
Oh, wow.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's a really, you guys were on lockdown for such a long time and limited to how long you were allowed outside, right?
Yeah, so we were only allowed out, for a couple of hours a day, and at one stage only an hour a day, and we were only limited. We've been limited most of the time to within 5 k's of our house, which is, pretty restricting. So we are currently at 25 k's, so that's great. And apparently, if all things go well, in a couple of weeks, we'll have no limitation and we'll be able to move around our state. It's going to be quite some time before
Fingers
anybody
crossed
else
for
lets
you.
us in, but
Yeah.
yeah, let's hope so. So
Yeah.
yeah, live events would be great, but in the meantime, online is a whole new world for us.
Yeah. So it's become so much more important connecting with
Yeah.
people online. Let's talk a little bit about your journey. You were a dentist before, is that right?
Yeah, so my profession and my training is a dentist. So more than 30 years ago, started in dentistry. And probably in the last 10 years, the kind of dentistry became less and less important, and the sake became more and more important. So yeah, I've come to sake very late in my life. I sort of kind of kick myself and I regret not having found it earlier, but on the other hand, I'm so happy that I did finally find sake world, and that I can do something that I am totally passionate about. And hey, dentistry was great, but sake is so much more fun.
That's great. How did you get interested in sake? Could you tell us a little bit about like your introduction to how you became so passionate?
Yeah, I think, dentistry was a way that I could afford to travel to Japan initially. And the first time I ever came to Japan was 2008, which was, 12 years ago. And at that time, we all thought in our heads that it was so expensive to travel in Japan, but actually it turned out in reality to be, quite affordable. But I came, I started falling in love with the food and the food culture. And along the way, after annual trips to Japan, I sort of got introduced by guys working in restaurants and bars and izakaya to sake. And I was like, I have no idea what this is. I know I like it, but I have no idea what this is. And I think, for me personally, I'm one of those people that just needs to be educated on these things to really understand it. So when I came back to Australia, one of my friends sent me a message and said, Hey, have you heard there's a sake course in Melbourne for the first time? And I thought, I'm going to have a go at that. So that was, when I went and did formal qualifications in sake in 2016. And that was like the door opening for me. And that was with the Wine Spirit Education Trust, which runs a sake program throughout the world. Fantastic opportunity for me. But before that, started learning Japanese, and that was another thing because I thought I needed to understand how to read the labels, which was, as you know, it still is a great mystery to many people, including myself. But I'm still working at it. Went back to university for a year and did full-time Japanese, and now I'm 7 years down the track and still learning. So all of that helps. But that is how I really came to sake. And it was a long route, but yeah, very happy to be here. Uh, yeah, yeah. So I think when I really became invested was I the Wine Spirit Education Trust. I was lucky enough to win an award, which was sponsored by a company called the International Wine Challenge, and that allowed me to become a judge for a year as a trial in the sake division competition. And that, meeting everybody from around the world who was involved in the sake industry, was just blew my mind and really, really got me enthused. So that was a major kind of motivator for me to come back to Australia and think about doing more specialized work in sake. And then my teacher who taught me all about sake, Yukino Ochiai, she ran a Kurobito tour experience. So Kurobito is somebody who works in a brewery. And so we decided to go on that tour. It was super, super focused, a week working at 3 different breweries around Japan. And that really got me into grassroots, understanding the fermentation of sake and how it all came together. Kind of really unique experience, but I would really, really recommend it to anybody. Get some time in a brewery.
Yeah,
I think,
that looks amazing. So the pictures I'm showing right now, you're washing rice in the factory. You're
yeah,
sorting the hot rice. Tell us about
yeah.
the process you experienced.
Yeah, so the washing rice this is actually in Aichi Prefecture with Sekiya Shuzo, and they have a smaller training sake facility where you can go and make your own brew and learn how to make brew. And we were there, and the washing the rice is all timed, and you have to be we're actually only got 5 kilos of rice in those silver baskets, but it's incredibly heavy. You've got water pouring in and you're washing it. And so, I mean, this is the physical side of sake brewing that we don't think about. I think I could manage 5 kilos, but they do 10 kilos every time when they're washing. And so they're strong and used to it. So, yes, that was us. And we've got a stopwatch on us, and we're learning how to wash like a true professional. And then the other big table thing is actually in the koji muro, which is the room for making koji. So we are breaking up clumps of hot rice and turning that. Yeah, so that's like the integral key part of making sake is it's all about koji.
And
So
koji, for people who might not know, is basically mold.
yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, so it's steamed rice that has had a mold called Aspergillus oraceae sprinkled all over it, and the mold is allowed to grow. The mold sends out little shoots, what we call hyphae, which bury themselves in the rice grain, searching for the carbohydrate core, or the water core as well. And what they do is it releases enzymes, helps to break up the rice as it ferments. So the enzymes from the koji are really what the brewers are after, the action of the enzyme. So koji is fascinating. It's in so many of your foods, right? So you're based in Japan, so miso, soya sauce, sake, shochu, koji is part of all of those processes.
Yeah,
kind of
and
ubiquitous these days.
it's so interesting. It's so a basic part of Japanese cuisine, but it's so good for your body and your immune system. So like I talked to Paprika Girl the other day, and she's talking about she's
Yeah,
trying to incorporate fermented foods into her diet every day in Japan because you can. There's so many different kinds, right?
yeah,
Really
yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. So yeah, yeah, Koji enzymes is like everywhere now, for facials, you can go into all of the shops and buy Koji, or, like sake leaves. Sake kasu has Koji in it as well. Kasu is the leftover product from sake brewing, where the enzymes are still active, and then you can put them all over your face. And that's why I'm sure so many Japanese people look young.
Yeah, Kyoko Nagano, who I talked to in the series, she runs a business called Sake Lovers, and she says, I
Yes, I
love
know her.
koji.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining, Kyoko.
Yeah, yeah. And koji and sake are like rabbit holes. You move into one and you just lose yourself down the sake rabbit hole. And then the next one that happens is koji. And, I am guilty of being completely diving down both of them. Yeah, I've become more and more to the point that I think that koji is really vital for us to understand. Such a great thing.
Yeah,
I'm
great.
now making my own koji at home so that I
Oh,
can
wow.
make some of those beautiful fermented foods.
That's great. And the first time I met you online, we were talking about sake, and you said what really sparked your passion was tasting koji for the first time, that they
Yeah,
gave you some to
yeah.
eat at the brewery.
Yeah, yeah, that was 2014. It was the first time I had ever been to a sake brewery, and that was in a tiny little village called Mizunami in Gifu Prefecture. And we went to a sake brewery called Nakashima Shuzo, which had been going for like 300 years. And we were in this koji muro, which in that brewery was right up high in the eaves or in the attic kind of space. Was really, really hot and moist and damp. And I have vivid memories of the brewer just handing me this handful of koji. And I'm like, what? You want me to eat this? He's like, eat it, eat it. And I'm like, okay. And it was just this beautifully sweet, nutty, almost chestnutty sort of flavor. And that really just did my head in because I couldn't work out how it was sweet because it was rice, and how that became sake, the final product. And that's really what started my whole interest in exploring further. Yeah, so that was on a food tour, and my very first sake brewery will be etched in the brain forever, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll talk a little bit more about you actually have a brewing collective in online and in Australia, but we'll dive into that a little bit later. I've got a picture here of you walking along towards a tunnel. Is that Noto Brewery, you said?
Yeah, so actually that was just at Christmas last year. So I when I'm in Japan, I always try, if I can, to visit local sake breweries. And I was over in Ishikawa Prefecture for the first time, and what an amazing place. In December, it's incredible. That time of the year, it's cold, it's beautiful. So we went to Noto, and we were really, really fortunate to be able to visit this incredible brewery there, which had a railway line running behind it, which the government decided to abandon, and I no longer use it. So the brewery actually applied for ownership of the railway line that was directly behind them, and it ran into a hill. So they had almost a kilometer of railway tunnel sealed off, and they were storing all of their sake inside that. And I thought, wow, this is amazing that you've got this kind of it because the thermal control is great, but this amazing space. And in breweries, space is always at a premium, right? Storage is a key problem, so this was a great way of solving it.
Wow,
And
awesome.
they also they also had a little train that you could hop onto, grab some sake, and go on a picnic. So,
I
yeah,
love
amazing.
that. And the fact that
Yeah.
you're not driving, so you can drink a little bit, relax. We have a
Yeah.
question from the Combini boys. They say, what's the best sake you can pick up at the Combini? I think we might have to get convenience store
Ooh.
experts in. But they also said, we lived in the Noto Suzu and Ukawa. I don't know that area, but yeah, you probably
Yeah,
were right next to where
yeah,
they were living. That's awesome.
yeah. I think Konbini sake, every time I come to Japan, it's changing. The range is getting better, it's getting more extensive. We are seeing some more premium sake inside konbinis now,
Yeah.
rather than futsushu or table sake that we used to dominate the market. So yeah, konbini sake. Well, we should do a konbini sake tour.
We
How about that?
should. I think, yeah, definitely for a follow-up live stream, we'll go to different convenience stores and show what they have. It's probably region by region is different as well. Like
Yeah,
I
for sure.
find in our local Lawson or local 7-Eleven, they have a lot of local sake, local shochu. So it's probably region based, which is great. That's the
Yes.
way it should be.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of regionality in sake. So I think, your food, the style of food that you eat in your daily life is probably different from somebody in Akita. So the sake is also different, and there's definite regionality in sake. So, we that's definitely recognized. So yeah, it makes total sense that the convenies will be stocking different stuff,
Yeah.
to appeal to their local market, which is what convenies are all
Absolutely.
about, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we just had a comment from Little Foreigner saying Fukucho's seafood is now in 7-Eleven in the Hiroshima area.
Yay!
Yay.
Oh,
So
let's talk about
let's talk
Fukucho
about Fukucho
seafood.
then. Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. So, okay, one of my most favorite sakes. So, one of the things I've done during COVID time has been to create a sake store, an online sake store in Australia, which is something I had always wanted to do but never got round to. But one of my best sellers and probably one of my most favorite sakes is this one, which is the Imara Fukucho, a seafood sake, or seaside sparkling as it's known here in Australia. So, yeah, I mean, this is from Hiroshima, your area, Joy. Imada Sake Brewery, which is in Akitsu, which is a small kind of coastal town, just maybe, what is it, an hour and a half from central Hiroshima, I suspect.
Yeah, it's
Um,
really near Kure. It's not
yeah,
far from
yeah,
Kure,
just
and
further on. Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
beautiful area to go and visit. And the Kura is really great to see itself. Really cool. All the sake breweries are so beautiful with the red brick
yes,
chimneys,
yes,
right?
the
And then
chimney. Yeah.
the old it's a
Well, I think,
traditional.
at one time in, Mukashi, long time ago, there were many, many sake breweries in Akitsu, but now I think there's, fewer than six. And so, yeah, Imada Sake Brewery is now run, and the president is Miho Amada, who is a female, and I think third or fourth generation. And, a woman who's had 25 years of sake brewing under her belt. So she is kind of unique in that there are very few people who are Kuramoto or president, plus the master brewer, and she fulfills both roles in her brewery, which is, I think, an incredible thing. It's a lot of work, and she's been making some amazing sake, which I do love everything she makes.
It's
I think
amazing. And
this
she
is,
was I went to a event, tasting event years ago, and she was running the tasting event. She was pairing all the different kinds of sake she had with different kinds of food, small
yeah,
dishes. She also had the water that
yeah,
she uses to brew the sake, and she uh, gave us advice to drink the water with the sake, and you can appreciate the sake more. And she
yeah.
taught me so much from that event. And of course, the first time I had sparkling sake too was there. So that's like one of her most favorite brands now.
Yeah, I think I really love her because she does everything to match the food from her area. And I think when I was in Akitsu, I just, you drive down the coast and there's just oyster leaves after oyster farm, oyster farm, oyster farm, and like that everywhere. And I think the seafood and the oysters that go amazingly well with their sake. And then I think also around the hills around Akitsu, there's a lot of citrus growing, so lemons and limes. And again, this sake, she's made with a very unique form of koji, which is called white koji rather than the normal yellow koji. And the white koji gives us a little bit more citric acid when it's fermented. So this sparkling sake has sort of like a feel of citrus in it as well. So we've kind of got the saline feel from the sea, which goes incredibly fine with the oysters. And then we've got that beautiful sparkling creamy texture because it's a little bit cloudy as well. And then we've got this little citric acid finish. So it is a great thing to drink. And Australians love it. I use this like pretty much routinely for most of my events to lead off with. And people are like, oh, they instantly relax when they have a glass of this and they go, okay, she's not going to punish us. The sake is going to be beautiful, right? So
That's great.
that's
Yeah,
why I love using it. And it's probably one or first or second on my bestseller list. So
that's
thank
awesome.
you, Imara
Yeah,
Brewery, for this
Imara
great
San
drink.
doing a great job.
Yeah.
And I love
So
how
it's
in your
vegan as well.
description, of course, you should eat it with seafood based on the label and everything. But in your description, you say try it with pizza. I love that.
Yeah, totally. It's I think this is an all-rounder actually, this sake, because it's got all bases covered, right? It's got the fruitiness on the front, it's got the body, it's got the depth, and then it's got the lovely little touch of acid on the finish. So in my book, you can have this with anything. And I
Yes.
think, we really want to move sake into the land of Western food. I mean, my big driver with the events that I do and the talking to people about sake is about how it suits so well with Western food as well as Japanese food. And if we don't move sake into the Western food and talking about it with other cuisines, then sake in Australia will die, right? Because it cannot be sustained only with Asian food.
I
We
think
need to talk. We
I
need to
think
talk
that's
that
true.
talk.
And I've heard that in France, sake has a real popular stream with French restaurants, that they
Yeah,
like pairing it with French foods. And,
yeah.
there's no reason you can't drink sake with different kinds of foods, and it pairs really well.
Yeah, I have done an amazing dinner with Philippe restaurant, which is a French restaurant here, and we did a full sake pairing, and it was beautiful. And I think definitely, sake has this component called umami. And here's another rabbit hole. What is umami? But umami is very much about being, the fifth taste. And umami is to do with, amino acids in sake and glutamate particularly. But amino acids and umami in sake matches really well with umami in food. So sake just sits alongside food so beautifully, and any style of food really. And we have, only 20% of the acidity of wine. So you're not having to deal with those high acidity levels that you often find in wine, which can make pairing or matching quite difficult. But I think most sake actually, there's a lot to be said for what we call chokushusho, which is, sake that is just designed to be had with food. It just doesn't fight with it. It's just beautiful. So that's my kind of emphasis. I love that style of sake.
That's great. And let's talk next about a great brewery called Nida Honke, which you
Yeah,
introduced
okay.
me to, and
Yeah,
I'm really excited because they're so sustainability focused. It's amazing.
yeah. Well, I think, sake and sustainability are virtually hand in hand these days. I think it's becoming more and more prominent. And I think we are beginning to talk the language of sustainability more and more. But so many sake breweries are already much further down the track than we would think, right? And this is one in particular that I wanted to talk to you about because I knew you'd be fascinated with Nida Honke, which is my second best or you know best, most favorite sake is the Odiaka Junmai Genjo from Nida Honke. So Nida Honke, right, 1711, so 300 years it's been going, more than 300 years now because it obviously 2011 was their anniversary. But very, very significant time for them, because obviously the great earthquake and tsunami, and then the associated problems at Fukushima, were a problem for them, because they were only 72 k's from the Fukushima plant. But as luck would have it, the wind was blowing the other way on that particular day. But why I love Fukushima Nida Honke is because they were the first brewery to transfer to 100% organic rice, using organic rice in their sake. And that was around 2010 that they started doing that. And the current brewery president's father really was instrumental in starting that, and he started growing rice in 1967. So that's a long time ago, right? So they had their own rice paddies, but the whole thing about them is that they wanted no pesticides, no chemicals, and using kind of what was there. So on this label, we've got the frog, a very fat frog, and so I call the sake fat frog. But they use the frogs, they put the tadpoles into the rice paddies, and as the frogs grow, they consume all the weeds and they leave the rice plants to grow. So they are basically using these, working in conjunction with their local environment to, produce great organic rice, which they're then brewing with. So yeah, I mean, that's a great thing, right? So, yeah,
Sorry, I'm on mute again. Okay, I was so happy to read so much about them from their website. And one of the things that I'm so excited about, and the reason I started my own business, is because you sometimes come across these great brands, these great companies that are so sustainability focused, but you've never
yes,
heard of them. And so I
yeah,
was really happy to see on their website, they're very clear about being certified
yeah,
with Japan Organic Society or certification, exactly what they're doing. They're very transparent. They're trying to change their whole town to
yeah,
be
that's right.
self-sufficient, all organic for all the farming. They created an agriculture cooperative or something. I mean, it's
Yeah,
amazing. They've done some great
yeah.
work.
And I think the thing is that they are very much focused on the next generation. So they're 18th generation now on their land and on their site, and they desperately want something better for the 19th generation. And it's all about, they've even got it on the bottle here, this is a preserving Japanese rice fields. That is their motto. That is what they're all about: minimal impact philosophy, and putting back, using what they have. So they've got a water well on their property, as well as a nearby river, but they're all about preserving the water, preserving the rice fields, and making sake, which embodies all of that. So, yeah, incredible philosophy. And it really resonates here in Australia, because people really love that story. They identify with it. We've got a huge emphasis on, health here. So we can talk about the sake: no preservatives, no tannins, no sulfites, which actually is the same as a lot of sake. But yeah, great organic rice. And maybe less hangover if you indulge.
Well, I mean, the thing that I love as well is they're not only focused on the environment. The organic part is so important, but they're also
Yeah,
focused on building their community, working together with other farmers, being self-sufficient, training their staff. One of their key points of their aim by 2025 is they want all their staff to deeply
to be trained
understand about
every role.
fermentation and
Yeah,
about sales so that all their staff can transition to different roles and stuff. I mean, that is very rare in Japan
yeah,
to have that
yeah,
kind of really top down sustainability mindset that includes training and
yeah,
education for consumers as well as staff. So awesome.
yeah. Yeah, I think that they want everybody in their brewery to be, like, in every role, comfortable and upskilling and educating. I know it is an incredible community thing that they've got going there. And I wish them every success. It is a brewery that I haven't been to yet, but it's like high on my list. I really, really want to do it. We've had such amazing stories. We have an incredible series being run here by another woman, Simone Maynard, called Taste with the Toji, and she's interviewed all of these breweries, which has kept the Australian sake people so in touch and so focused on these incredible breweries and their stories. So that was an amazing session with Nida San, and talking with him about what he was doing there is incredible, right? But
Yeah, that's
one
great.
brewery that I wanted to talk to you about that I did visit, which has a similar sustainability focus, is Aramasa in Akita Prefecture. And I was there in October last year. Can I tell you a little bit about
Yes,
his
please. Yeah, yeah.
Uyashinai project? Yeah, so Uyashinai is a 300-year-old mountain village, probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Akita, and it was what they call a disappearing village. Now, Joy, I think you probably know a lot about disappearing villages and abandoned houses and things like that, where the original culture of the area was just slipping away. The young people were leaving, and the elderly people who were living in the village, when they died, nothing happened, and the houses just got left. Nobody wanted to go and work in those areas or maintain the village culture. So Yusuke Sato, who is the Kuramoto president and Toji at Aramasa Sake Brewery, very, very famous, quite famous sake um, brewer in Japan, he discovered Uyashinai and their rice fields because they're predominantly a rice growing village. And he decided he would ask them to be his area for growing organic rice, i.e., no pesticides, no chemicals. And initially, he hired like half the rice paddies or acquired half the rice paddies in the village and set about doing this, which was a very difficult project because it had never been done in an organic way before. And he got his head brewer at the time, and Kosaki-san, and sent him to Oyashinai to grow rice. And the man had never grown rice before. So there was a lot of learning, a very, very steep learning curve. So within the first year, the project was a complete washout. It didn't work. And over the years, it's got more and more. The harvest has increased. And as the other rice farmers in the area have seen this happening, they have been influenced by Sato-san, who's been at them to change. So he almost will hopefully have most of the village under organic rice farming conditions shortly. And what's happening is that the young people are coming back and just trickling back one or two here and there, but living in the village again, revitalizing the village. So it's an incredible story of how somebody's sake brewing passion has led to rice farming and the whole saving of this village. So, yeah, I think my understanding is that somebody's doing a documentary on this too, which will be amazing when it comes out.
Wow.
So
Sounds
watch that one.
amazing. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Can you see? I gave you some photos of just how beautiful
Oh,
that
it's
area is.
absolutely,
It's stunning.
absolutely
Yeah.
stunning. Yeah, gorgeous.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
something that I hope people don't forget about the need to support the sake industry, because sake supports the rice industry, and the landscape of Japan would be
Yeah.
completely different without Japanese rice. The
Yeah. And I think,
festivals that are focused on rice harvesting or rice planting would all be lost as well. So, and then there's so many side industries as well connected to sake brewing. So
yeah. And I
it's
think
really
we're seeing
important.
it is really important. And after the war, the government actually forbade Japanese breweries to own rice paddies. And it's only in relatively recent times that there's been this shift in legislation that has allowed brewers to rent paddies and then acquire rice paddies and grow their own rice. And, like many people don't realize that, sake breweries growing their own rice is a relatively recent phenomenon because, when we compare this to wine, wine makers grow their own grapes. We just take that for granted. So how must the brewers have felt to be prevented or stopped from growing their own rice? So this is a new thing that, a relatively new thing that we're now seeing sake breweries being involved at grassroots level with rice, which is kind of a new thing. So hopefully we'll see more growth in that area, but there's already an organization that has been formed for breweries that are also growing their own rice so that they can compare notes and keep research going in that area. So that's a new thing. So let's watch the next decade and see what's going to happen there. But
Yeah.
you're right, they desperately want to be able to control that side of things as well.
Yeah.
And so you brew sake in the winter, and then the brewery staff go and grow rice in the summers and the
Wow.
spring.
Well, it's
So
just
yeah,
such a great collaborative
yeah,
aspect to community building, right? Like
yeah,
when we talk about shochu with Stephen Lyman, and he's talking about the shochu being made from sweet potato in Kagoshima, so it's the growing of the plants and the using of the plants for alcohol or other purposes. It's such a great, of course, naturally organic relationship, right? That
yeah.
should be
And I think
encouraged.
Nina Honke talked about that as well, that, the staff that are working in the brewery actually stay all year and live locally because they're also involved in the rice growing. Whereas, typically sake brewing was transient. You'd only have the winter and then people would disappear and then come back next year. So this whole thing about community, which is the focus we were talking about earlier, I think we're seeing that more and more around some of the breweries, is that they are now looking at total lifestyle for the people that work within the brewery. And yeah, I think that's a great thing. And it's about sustainability and growth of the local community as well. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I think sake, from what I've heard from people like Kyoko Nagano and other people in the sake industry, sake has a real hold abroad. It is exported a lot
Yeah.
compared to shochu or amazake or different drinks in
Yeah.
just drunk in Japan. So it's great that it has that international feel or understanding. I That's really
Yeah.
interesting about the industry.
Yeah. I think, by and large, domestic production and domestic consumption in sake is still going to be the most vital thing. So, you guys in Japan, you need to drink more sake, but there's an overwhelming uptick or an upsurge in sake interest abroad and internationally. And yet, we're still probably only 3 or 4% of total production is exported. But having said that, those numbers are going to be vitally important after COVID, because there's been a huge impact right throughout the industry. We really need to encourage people to embrace sake so that we can re-stimulate the sake industry in Japan and people's interest here. But yeah, I think Australian people really, really love it. We're trying to increase exposure, and that's really what my sort of little business is all about, is just trying to talk sake more and bring it into situations so that Australian people can see it and perhaps understand it a little bit more, because we have a huge gin thing going on here in Australia. We've got a vibrant cocktail scene, and I'd dearly love sake to be part of that. And yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens over the next year. Today, retail and hospitality open, so maybe the sake importers will start bringing more sake in here, because let's face it, the last kind of 6 months has been bleak. Um, it's been hard work for everybody involved. But
Yeah.
let's have a look at the sales figures going forward. But yeah, I think reviving interest, keeping interest, and my focus with all of that is really about education. So sake education is kind of key for the international market, particularly. And so I think we're seeing lots of sommeliers totally interested, but also just people are shifting, like people who do wine courses are suddenly really keen to do sake courses. So slowly we are increasing exposure for sake, and hopefully just demystifying it so people can understand the labels and enjoy the drink.
I think
But
that's so important, and that's why having it embedded in an international industry is really key, because it opens up people like you, experts in the field, who are acting as bridges to tell us about the flavor profiles, or tell us about the backstories, or help us read the labels. Like, even people living in
yeah.
Japan, this is so hard.
So, and I think, that's one of the things that kind of spurred me to form the Sake Brewing Collective. And so I just want to, tell you a little bit about that, because that was really about trying to get people interested in sake fermentation from like grassroots level. So, during COVID, people were making lots of sourdough and doing crazy things in the kitchen. And I thought, well, why can't people make sake as a kitchen bench project, which is, basically a 3 liter jar. I can teach people how to make alcohol at home. So I started the Sake Brewing Collective as like, hey, who wants to brew sake with me? And I was thinking that I might get, 10 people or so who might be interested, but it kind of just had a life of its own and it took off. And so before I knew it, there were like, yes, hands up, me too, me too, me too. And we ended up starting a Facebook group called the Sake Brewing Collective, which I sort of started just feeding people things to do to start making sake, because I wanted to use a recipe that had been around from the 14th century in Japan. What makes Dobaroku? You may have heard of the terminology Dobaroku. And for people who don't know what that is, it's more like a more rustic style of cloudy sake that's made as a one. We add everything in one lot, and we don't filter it at the end, so the rice is retained inside the brew. So it's kind of a really cloudy, very homely style of sake that used to be made very frequently in Japan, and particularly in farming communities. So I wanted to do that recipe because it's a 14th century recipe. What can go wrong, right? It's had 600 years to perfect, and it was very safe, but 100% natural fermentation, so spontaneous yeast coming from the air to start the brewing off, and using lactobacillus to create an acidic water first, or what we call soyashi mizu. So I started this, and we ended up, close. I think maybe now there's over 250 people who've joined the group. But at the time, we ran a brew called the August New Moon Sake Project, which was tied up with the moon. So when the new moon started, we would have a brew of sake finish, so we'd be able to sit down and drink it together. We would be out of lockdown. Unfortunately, the lockdown didn't disappear; it stayed, but people made sake and they had to enjoy it by themselves. But it was amazing to see. We had people jumping on from all around the world, brewing with us, and everybody was different because the climate was different in their areas, and so the brews progressed at different speeds. And it was a fascinating example of what you can do on your kitchen bench. So that taught people a lot about the components of sake, taught them about koji, taught them about water, talked to them about yeast. And it really was a great way of people who had never had any contact with sake just loved the idea of fermenting something like this.
Yeah,
So
it's so fun.
the only
And then
problem was,
making
yeah, the
it
Japanese guys couldn't
yourself.
do it.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah,
Making
yeah,
it yourself gives so much more appreciation for when you buy the finished product, right? It's like
yeah,
Caitlin and Linda were talking about taking pottery classes and then going pottery shopping, right? So
yeah,
you like, wow, wow, that's so hard. Or I
yeah.
tried to make it, oh my gosh, this tastes so good. So it's a
Mm.
great connection project, right?
Yeah, it is. It just exactly right. You go into a shop and you taste it and you go, oh, I'd love to be able to make sake like that,
Yeah.
but you potentially know that you might never get like that. But I live in hope. We keep doing these small projects, but yeah, sake produced at commercial scale is still essentially the same, and that's why a lot of people were able to connect with it. I think So yeah, that was a fun project, and if anybody's out there and wants to get involved, please join us at the Sake Brewing Collective, because it's a free resource and it's really about that. We've also got a lot of recipes for sake kasu, and kasu is, the waste or the leftover part of the sake brewing process. And the collective went on to make bread from the kasu. So we had shokopan, sake kasu shokopan. Um, we were pickling with it. We were making, marinade sake kasu, kasazuke salmon. So lots of different recipes and ideas were floated on that forum, and
That's
I'm
great.
still astounded, yeah, what comes
use
through there.
use the whole process. I've seen
Mm.
beautiful soap that comes from
Yes,
the
yes,
byproduct of sake at
yeah.
Tokyu Hands, the chain around Japan. We have a comment from Kyoko. She said, "This is awesome. In Japan, we're prohibited to brew sake at home. You need a license, but really nice to hear people overseas keeping our tradition and making it by yourself. I love Dobaroku." Isn't that interesting? Because we see in the supermarket people can buy the set to make umeshu every
Yeah.
year when the ume plums come on the trees, and
Mm.
but sake is forbidden, or doboroku is
Y-
forbidden.
Yeah,
It's an
yeah.
interesting
Look,
comparison.
it's an incredibly interesting thing. And I mean, I think we found on the group, we were devastated that the people from Japan, many of them wanted to be involved and couldn't because of legislation. And I completely understand that they shouldn't. But Dobaroku was made illegal in Japan. Probably around the time of the Meiji, at the end of the Meiji Restoration, because you know part of it's tied up with the taxation of Japanese sake. So at the time, the government was, getting a lot of resources from this taxation of sake, and people making sake in their own home was preventing them from buying it. And this is, part of the basis of prohibition in Japan with respect to Dobaroku. And it persists, but there are several people who are fighting. It's not the only reason, but that was one of the key points. And I think there are people who are fighting that in Japan. They still are trying to get Dobaroku legalized, but some of the prefectures have been able to do that. So, up in Awate, they are allowed to make Dobaroku up there. They have Dobaroku festivals, and there's a company that is making Dobaroku and selling it commercially, Tono. So, I mean, I love that,
That's
but
awesome.
this,
And
we'd love to see it right throughout.
yeah, and I think if you encourage people to try to make it, you kind of encourage more enthusiasm about the industry, right? If
Yeah,
you have local contests for the best doboroku, then you would have
yeah,
more interest, because it's like craft beer, right? People are
yeah,
interested in the individual stories behind who's making what, and then there's more buzz about the industry,
yeah,
which I think would be better. So I hope to see it
yeah.
become possible in more areas. Winnie Tan, thanks for joining from YouTube. She
Winnie,
says,
hi,
love,
Winnie.
love the Dobodoku Sake project. A really good step-by-step guide is provided. My second batch is tasting better than the first. Good job, Winnie.
Wow, fantastic news. Yeah, that's
and
great.
and Tina writes, Wheel Woman Cycling, it was such a great learning process in more ways than one, and Melissa was a brilliant teacher, especially in rescue methods.
Yeah, yeah. Look, there were, I learned so much, they learned so much, and I think there's more to go. It's been simmering along quietly, but the main thing is for people to go back and keep brewing. I've been brewing for maybe 3 years now by myself. And just playing around with different recipes, and there's a lot of different recipes out there, so this is part of the fun. Is every batch is slightly different. You tweak something, you change the water. You might use a mineral water instead of tap water one time. You might try different rice. And I brewed one batch with arborio rice, which is completely different from Japanese rice, but it just looked like the carbohydrate core of it looked beautiful. And then I found out that in Spain, they brew with arborio rice, their sake there anyway. So
Wow.
I'm like, oh, that was great. But it behaved differently. So these were the fun things that we learned. So, hey, I think, from my point of view, Joy, you can never stop learning. And I think the key to sake in my part of the world is education and exposure and learning,
Yeah.
and I think the Sake Brewing Collective was a great way for us to get across some grassroots stuff about how different sake brewing is to wine. And we did do a completely organic, like basically natural ferment. We didn't add in any chemicals, we didn't add in any yeast. So it was a pretty cool project, I think. I'll look back
Really
on it with
good.
a great deal of fondness, yeah, in
Yeah.
time to come.
Really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
And I sometimes come across small cafes or kiseten, Japanese style coffee shops, or small restaurants, and they're making their own amazake. So the
Yeah,
sweet
yeah.
non-alcoholic version is maybe easier to make on your own or more allowed. So I love that, and it's lots of health benefits of amazake. Kyoko has a
Mm.
comment on Facebook. Thanks, Kyoko. She said it's so true. Sad thing is some sake breweries can't make sake this year. They said they couldn't purchase sake rice. So that's
Yeah,
that's
wow.
another argument for having your own rice fields, right? And having control over like self-sufficiency for the right kind of rice that you want to make sake from.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
mean, I think this is going to be a topic going forward, right?
yeah. David on Facebook also is adding some information about the documentary you mentioned. He said
Oh, great.
it was
Fantastic.
on NHK a while back, and it's disappearingvillagefilm.com. You can find it. I'll have to check it out, David. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it just was so impactful going to a Yashinai and hearing and Sato-san speak so powerfully about what he was trying to achieve there. It really we were a group of educators, and it kind of blew us away about his level of commitment to that area and how it was working. So yeah, please, I think that would be an amazing thing to watch. Follow up
Yeah,
on that.
absolutely. You also sent me a photo of you meeting Noguchi San. Do you want to introduce him?
Ah, yeah. So Noguchi-san, when I was in Ishikawa in December, probably another highlight for me in my lifetime was meeting Naohiko Noguchi-san. And, Noguchi is very, very famous right throughout Japan. He is now, I actually met him. That picture was taken on his birthday, his 87th birthday. So he has been brewing sake since for more than 70 years now, because he started when he was 16. So he has retired 3 times and come back after a short period because he just believes that he is better, his health is better when he's brewing sake. Every time he retires, he gets sick. But when he comes back, he is better than ever. An incredible man who has really influenced, particularly Ishikawa sake and the, different. I love Noguchi Institute sake. So they have an amazingly modern, purpose-built sake brewery in the middle of the countryside outside of Komatsu. And I really recommend people visit it. It's got an incredible tasting setup there. It's an incredible facility making amazing sake. But Noguchi-san is somebody that, we talk about the sushi Jiro, and I think the ethos is the same. He should be a national living treasure, even if he's not, because his impact and what he's done for sake has been incredible. So yeah, a highlight for me was meeting him. So yeah, what a beautiful man.
That's awesome. You
Yeah.
also introduced a woman making sake in Sydney.
Oh yeah. Okay. This is my beautiful friend Chiho Uesan, and she is a Japanese, a woman who's been living in Australia for a little period of time, but she's been working for a craft sake brewery called Yuli's Brews, which is in Sydney, and they are a vegan beer brewery. And she was making kombucha for them for a long time, and every staff function that they would have, she would rock up with some of her homemade sake. And so eventually they said to her, hey, do you want to make sake on a commercial scale for us? So she started making her own, sake for Yuli's, and released the product last year. She has two. She has a Nogori sake and she has a Junmai sake, and both of them are nama. And amazing because she is using Australian rice, Australian water, and koji that is made in New South Wales. And she is using beer yeast for her sake. So perhaps
Wow.
not traditional in every sense of the word, but a uniquely Australian product from her her own craftsmanship and supported by the brewery. So I kind of met Chiho and I fell in love with her, and she's so relatable and she's the most beautiful person. And so, yeah, I have done some work promoting some of her at an event up in Sydney. She's come down and visited me in Melbourne and presented to gallery gatherings here. She's somebody to watch for the future, and I'm really excited about everything that she does. So yeah,
That's
we have
great.
not many breweries in Japan, in Australia. We have a long time sake brewery in New South Wales called San Masamune, which has been there for 15 years. And then we have Yuli's who are making some sake. But the future is looking bright. I hear we've got a couple of new craft sake breweries that might be happening in the next year. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's exciting. We have a
Yeah.
comment from Maki Tanaka. Thanks for joining from Facebook. Maki says, and Noguchi San is a gecko. He cannot drink. He doesn't drink.
That's right. That is right. Yeah, he does not drink. I'm not sure, Maki-san, if that was always the case, but it's definitely now the case. He definitely doesn't drink. Yeah. So the onus falls on us to do the drinking for him, I think.
Well, I love that when sake breweries will also make amazake, the non-alcoholic version, or
Mm,
a brewery making umeshu might make ume juice instead of the
yeah.
alcoholic version only, right? So to have
Yeah.
that dual purpose, so you can
Yeah.
provide for drinkers and non-drinkers, or drivers and non-drivers, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that we're seeing a trend coming through in sake brewing where lower ABV sakes. There's been a lot of exploration in that area because I think also Western people generally prefer to have a beverage which is slightly lower in ABV, and certainly amongst the young people, the trend is definitely towards non-alcoholic options. So we're seeing more and more non-alcoholic thing. At the moment, our market's being dominated by seltzers, which is, water, sparkling waters, which are alcoholic, but only like sitting at about 4% ABV. So I'm kind of interested if we can get into that market space as well. I think that would be really interesting. And I've been exploring, I've been looking for lower ABV drinks. So yeah, that's an area where we could have some growth, I think, in the next year or so.
Yeah, because the low alcohol version of beer certainly has a strong following in Japan, and even
Yeah.
non-alcoholic beer as well. So, and amazake is popular. Why not make a lower, if you can, with the same flavor profile, a lower
Yeah.
alcohol?
And I think that's why the sparkling sakes are always so much fun as well. Generally speaking, they are lower ABV. I mean, this one is 13%, so probably at the higher end of the scale, the Imara Seaside Sparkling. But most of them are kind of around 7, 8, 9%, and I think that's a really nice point. Particularly for us in Australia, because we are, believe it or not, going into summer now, so we can be sitting hopefully outside on the beach. That's a dream we're all holding on to at the moment. And then maybe with
Fingers
our
crossed. Yeah.
sparkling sake, right? That's going to be my Christmas, because this Christmas for me, it will be the first time in 10 years that I haven't been in Japan. So I am like devoed that I can't be there, but I'm really hoping that I can have a lovely time drinking sparkling sake.
That's great. Oh, we got a comment from Chiho Ue.
Ah,
Says, thanks, Melissa San. I'm learning a lot from you too. Thanks,
oh,
Chiho. Thanks for joining.
Oh, that's so lovely. And, she was great. Joined in our project brew for Sake Brewing Collective as well. So it was kind of cool for me to have support from brewers like Chiho-san. And then I've got my friend Dave, who's the owner of Zenkuro Sake Brewery, which is a sake that I import into Australia. And so he's based in New Zealand because, I am a Kiwi. So even though I live in Australia now for the last 25 years, my heart is always in New Zealand. So I have great support from Dave and Chiho. So it was great for the Sake Brewing Collective. I've also got a really cool friend called Atsuko-san, who's a winemaker. But Atsuko-san is a Japanese female winemaker who's based in Australia, but she worked in Urakasumi Sake Brewery for 18 months. So she's my mentor, and she was also helping us with the Sake Brewing Collective. So we had some amazing levels of expertise with, helping us with the brewing. So yeah, it was a fun project, and I hope we can just keep it simmering along and people are doing it more and more.
Yeah, that's great. And Chiho-san, I would love to learn how to make kombucha as well. You're a kombucha expert. Maybe you could add a lesson about kombucha to your sake collective.
Yeah, that's good. We can do a side tangent. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. Like kombucha is extremely popular in Australia, right? And I think that has been a huge push in terms of fermented beverages. So, water kefir and kombucha are huge, and what it does for our gut and, our gut health and our body health. Of course, I'd love to add sake in there as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's all those naturally fermented organisms running around. That's what we need, right?
Yeah. Well, it
Keep
was
us.
a great
Yeah.
talk today. That is our hour. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you so much, Joy.
Thank
Yeah.
you for your great
Thank
questions and
you,
comments.
everybody.
And go
Yeah.
find a new kind of sake or try to make your own. Get in touch with Melissa via the Sake Connect. There's a great website, sakeconnect.com. Let me see. Is that right? Yeah, sakeconnect.com.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And you're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Chiho says, ha ha ha, nice. Thanks, Chiho. And Maki Tanaka says, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a great day. Thanks,
Thank
Melissa.
you.
Bye.
See you.